Hi Yogi, and welcome to another slow flow class with me, Oceana. In today's episode, of course, we are heading into another 4-week exploration, and this time we are looking at backbends. If you have been to a backbend class that I've taught before, then you probably know that I'm not a particular fan of the name. So I tend to refer to these postures as front body openers instead, which usually shifts people's attention into the front body so that they think more about lifting and lengthening through the front body rather than bending from their back, which oftentimes leads to people really dumping into their lower lumbar spine, which can cause compression and eventually some pain in that area that's quite uncomfortable. So in today's practice, of course, this is a beginner-friendly class. I'll be giving you a lot of different options for all of these postures, and the only prop you'll really need is a blanket that you can fold into a rectangular shape. I always like to give you sort of different teaching points to focus on each week. This first week, I would really like you to focus on one of the most important aspects of backbends, and it's just one thing, but it's a very big, important and tricky thing, and that is the pelvis. So the pelvis is really where your hips and spine meet one another, and in sort of certain Buddhist traditions, the pelvis is sometimes referred to as the hara, which is sort of similar to a bowl, literally like a salad bowl. And that's actually quite a helpful way to think of the pelvis, because if you consider the pelvis as a bowl, then in your backbends, you are really trying to stabilize this area. So you're not trying to spill the contents of the bowl too far forward so the broth or tea or salad spills out. And you're also not trying to tilt it too far back so that the contents spill towards you. So you're ideally trying to keep that bowl as steady as you can as we move through these postures, which is a very tricky thing to do. So it's going to require quite a lot of attention and focus. I will talk you through some different ways of understanding how the pelvis moves in this class. So once you're ready and you've gathered all your props, then meet me in a seated position. We'll start with a restorative backbend. So we'll start today's practice with a restorative backbend so that we sort of are opening the front of the body before we even begin. And working in a passive way usually allows us to get a slightly different opening than when we work with the engagement of the muscles. So once you've got your blanket, roll it all the way up, make it quite a tight sort of roll. And from here, you want this roll to be at the back of the yoga mat. One hand on either side. We'll have the feet hip distance and shimmy the sitting bones forward towards the heels. From there, with the hands on top of this little roll, slowly let your spine come all the way to the floor until you're on your elbows. And from there, adjust your roll so that it comes right to the very bottom of your shoulder blades, which is about halfway down the spine for most of us. If you're a little bit taller, your proportions could be slightly different. So make sure that it doesn't feel too unbearable, especially if there's any pinching or pain. Feel free to remove the roll, possibly roll it once less because it might be slightly too high for you. You can have the arms out by the side. And you do want to make sure that the tops of your shoulders are supported by the floor, as well as your trapezius muscles, which is where the shoulders start to merge into the neck. And you also want the back of the head and the hips to be all the way on the ground. From there, options for the legs are to have your feet as wide as the mat with the knees dropping in. Or alternatively, if you wanted to make this a slightly deeper back bend, you can walk the feet forward slowly, possibly straighten the legs entirely until your feet are about, again, as wide as the mat. And then allow yourself to settle in here. Let the breath soften if you can. And notice that this sensation of this restorative back bend, which currently might be quite strange and unusual for the spine, because you've placed this roll directly underneath your upper thoracic spine, which naturally curves outwards And now we've adjusted the curve to go a little bit more inwards, which usually feels quite strange at the very beginning when we first get here. But over time, with each exhale, the body starts to adapt, to soften. And eventually you might not even notice the blanket. And just let anything that happened in your day before you got onto your yoga mat pass you by. So you start to shift away from thinking about things that have happened or things that might happen in the future towards the present moment. And if that's rather tricky today, then think about possibly following the movement of the breath with your mind. So start to follow the inhale through the nostrils, down the back of the throat, into the lower belly as you inhale. Watch the ribs expand and the chest lift. And as you exhale, follow all of those movements in reverse. Notice the chest drop, notice the ribs soften inwards. Trace that last bit of breath from the belly all the way through the throat and out of the nostrils. And notice that distinct feeling of expansion and lightness as you inhale. And that softness of the exhale as the body is almost pulled towards the floor by gravity. Almost a sense that you're lifting up, floating away as you inhale, and melting back into the floor as you exhale. Gently from here, if you've straightened the legs, rebend the knees, bring the feet flat to the floor. Press your elbows into the ground so that you can just briefly lift your spine and release the blanket. Plant the hands by the sides of your hips. Walk the feet in just a touch, and for a moment let the spine rest here until it finds its natural curves again. So that slight billowing out of your thoracic spine, the slight lift underneath your lower lumbar spine, and that lift behind your neck. Those are all the natural curves that we shouldn't minimize. We're not trying to have a perfectly flat back. And from here, we'll get into a little bit of movement. So initially, I want to talk you through a really important aspect of the pelvis. So really, we want to create a little bit of understanding of how the pelvis functions and moves. So plant the hands on top of those pointy parts of your hip bone. So one hand on each side. Walk your feet in so that they're directly underneath your sitting bones, feet hip distance. And we'll start by rocking the rocking the pelvis forward and back. So as you exhale, press into your heels and tilt the pelvis back. And as you inhale, have a sense that you're pulling the heels towards yourself against the stickiness of your mat. And you might notice that the arch in your lower back starts to lift a little bit more and increase. Again, as you exhale, press into the heels. The spine starts to flatten towards the floor and the tailbone lifts. And as you inhale, drawing the heels towards you, the lower back lifts and the tailbone is pressing down into the floor. And we'll do that a few more times, rocking forwards and back here. And what we tend to refer to this as is in Feldenkrais, we have this exercise that is known as the Feldenkrais clock. So we'll refer to that very top point when the spine is flat and the tailbone is lifted. we'll call that 12 o'clock on the clock. And when the tailbone is pressing down into the floor and the lower back is lifted, we refer to that as our 6 o'clock. Now, when you come to 12 o'clock, the pelvis is in a posterior tilt, so it's tilting back. And when you come back to that 6 o'clock, the pelvis is in an anterior tilt, so it's tilting forward. And you can almost imagine the pelvis as a bowl. So when it's tilting forward, you're spilling broth out of the front of the bowl. And when it's tilting back, the broth is spilling out the back towards you. And we'll make these our final few rounds here. Still working from the heels. And now on your next round, you'll have the hands down by your side and we'll expand that movement into the rest of the spine. And we've done this before if you've practiced with me a few times. So we'll again press into the heels. We'll let the tailbone lift. From there, extending that movement through the pelvis, we start to peel the spine off the ground as you inhale, lifting all the way up towards the ceiling, pressing through your hamstrings and glutes. And again, start the movement in your heels. So pull the heels towards yourself. It's almost a sense that you're pulling the spine down towards the ground, slowly releasing one vertebra at a time down. Again, as you press the heels away, the tailbone lifts first and you peel the spine up towards the ceiling as you inhale. And as you exhale, pulling the heels towards yourself, releasing the spine towards the ground. Move through that just one more round here. And from here, take your arms all the way up and overhead. Rest the left hand on top of the right. Release the arms, allow the elbows to soften and sort of hang down. Walk your feet to about the edges of the mat. They don't have to quite reach. Now we'll explore, if we come back to this idea of the Feldenkrais clock on the front of our pelvis, we'll explore our 3 and 6 o'clock. So from here, again, pressing through the heels, we start by pressing into our left heel and the knees will go over to the right side. Now that is us pressing into the 3 o'clock. And then opposite side, so we press down through the right heel, the knees travel over to the left side, and that is our 9 o'clock. I have to think about the clock face there. And again, we'll inhale and come back through center, and we'll take it to the opposite side. So pressing into your left heel, let the knees drop to the right. And pressing down through your right heel, let the knees travel over to the left. And then move through that just a few more times, inhaling for the knees to lift into center and exhaling to allow the knees to roll to one side. And continue to lead that movement again from your feet, from the heels. On this final round, as your knees come over to the right, see if you can shimmy your left shoulder just a little bit further underneath you towards the spine. Let the knees travel through center across to the left side, and then shimmy your right shoulder underneath you. Bring the knees back into center. Swap the hand that's on top. So right hand is on top of the left for me. Walk the feet to hip distance. So heels close to your sitting bones again. And from here again, press your heels away from you. Lift your tailbone, lift the spine up towards the ceiling and come to stay for a few rounds of breath here in your half bridge pose. Possibly, if you wanted to go a little bit further, walk your feet in so that you can come onto the balls of the feet and pressing the knees forward, press into your big toe, firmly ground that toe into the floor to lift a little bit higher. And staying for your final few rounds of breath. Exhale to slowly release one vertebra at a time down. Keep the heels lifted until the pelvis is all the way down on the floor. Then plant your feet all the way to the ground. Draw one knee at a time into the chest. For a moment, hug the knees in, round the forehead towards the knees. Give yourself a little bit of a counter stretch to the back bends. And from here, yogi's choice, you could release the left hand overhead and roll over to the left side of your mat. If you prefer to rock through the spine, bring the hands to the back of the knees. Rock forwards and back a few times. And after a few rocks here, we'll meet in a seated position. Now, if you don't have any knee pain, then from here you could choose to roll over your knees and find your way into a tabletop that way. Otherwise, any knee issues, shimmy the legs to one side and find your way onto hands and knees. And in your tabletop, just take a brief moment to check your alignment. So make sure that your hands are directly underneath your shoulders, the knees are directly underneath the hips, and the crown of the head is reaching towards the horizon line. Your tailbone is going in the opposite direction, creating a little bit more length and space between the vertebrae. From here, we'll make our way into cat-cow for a few rounds. So as you tuck under the toes, reach your tailbone up towards the ceiling, arch the spine, open the chest and roll the shoulders back. As you exhale, tops of the feet press down. You round the spine up towards the ceiling, pressing the floor away. And we'll move through that a few times, working with our own breath cycle. Exhaling to round. And inhaling to arch. And you might notice, again here, if you think back to that Feldenkrais clock, that when the spine is rounded, you're at 12 o'clock. And when you're arching the spine, you're at 6 o'clock. With a slightly different relationship to the ground and gravity. And possibly for your final few rounds here, noticing any tension in the spine, any areas that are a little bit more sticky. And equally noticing the positives, so areas where there seems to be a lot of mobility, a lot of spaciousness and ease. And the next time that you come back from a rounded position, we'll meet in the center between those two extremes in a neutral spine. We'll tuck the toes under and we'll walk the hands just a little bit further forward. Possibly the knees have to walk back if you've got plant friends in your way as well. And we'll slowly lower ourselves all the way to the floor with control. From there, bringing your forearms in front of you. Press the tops of the feet down. Feet are about hip distance. And you want your elbows to be about 1 inch in front of your shoulders here for Sphinx pose. The fingertips can spread here, so press the palms into the ground. Roll your shoulders back to open the chest. Keep your eyes at the front of the mat. And then with the toes pressing into the floor, you'll notice that the knees lift. And again, there's a slight tucking under of the tailbone, which brings you back into that 12 o'clock position of the pelvis. Press the floor away with your forearms. And from here, see if you can deepen the back bend into your upper thoracic spine by using your forearms, pulling the hands back towards your feet to open the chest. Finding just a few moments here, feeling that slight compression in the upper back. And also bringing a little bit of tension to the ease that you hopefully feel in your lower back now. From here, soften your shoulders, bring your right forearm parallel to the front of the mat, left fingertips underneath your left shoulder. Bend your left knee and bring the foot closer to you so that you can possibly reach your left hand back and actually catch the foot with your hand. From there, possibly you could bring the heel a little bit closer towards the sitting bone. And if the heel is touching the sitting bone, it might be accessible for you to spin your fingertips forward, roll your shoulder in and lift your elbow towards the ceiling into full half frog. If you're there, you're actually aiming the heel of your foot past the hip. So you're aiming it towards the floor. Staying just for a few breaths in any variation here so that we can open and lengthen the muscles in the front of the body, which allows us to find a slightly deeper back bend. Gently from there, release the foot and change sides. So left forearm parallel to the front of the mat, right fingertips underneath the right shoulder. The right heel moves towards the right sitting bone. Possibly you can catch the foot with your right hand. If that's worked out, maybe the foot can come a little bit closer. Possibly if the foot is all the way to the sitting bone, again, you're turning the right fingertips forward, rolling the right shoulder in and lifting the elbow towards the ceiling. Maybe you're able to bring the heel a little bit closer towards the floor, moving it past your hip. Not working into, of course, any knee pain. So making sure that whatever you're working with is easily accessible to you and there's no sharp pinching or pain. Gently, gently release the foot all the way back. Plant the hands underneath your shoulders and exhale to press your way to a tabletop and all the way back into a child's pose. The hands are in front, the knees can be as wide as is comfortable, pressing a little bit of weight from the hands into your sitting bones to create more length in the back body. Take just a few rounds of breath here, maybe release the head to the floor if it reaches. And from here, tucking under the toes as you exhale with bent knees, make your way into a downward facing dog, lifting the sitting bones up and back. Feet are about hip distance when you arrive. Hands are around shoulder distance. Press down through index finger and thumb. And possibly have a little walk through the feet, pedal the legs. Maybe shimmy the hips if that feels good. Possibly find a few moments of stillness. Bring the big toes to touch at the back of the mat as you inhale. Left leg lifts up and back into three-legged dog. As you exhale, draw the left knee into the chest. Step or shimmy the left foot forward towards the hands. Bring the back knee to the ground. We'll make our way into Anjaneyasana, our low lunge. So strongly engage your front heel towards the back knee. From that engagement in the legs, lift the arms and the torso towards the ceiling. And interlace your fingers and bring the hands behind the head. Let the elbows be wide. And press your head into the hands and resist it with your hands. So you're pressing them against each other, finding that engagement in your shoulders, in the back of the neck, the back of the spine. And possibly from there, without losing any of that muscular tension that you've just built, maybe you're able to draw your hips a little bit further forward and down. Possibly lifting the center of the chest into crescent moon, our lunging back bend. Always working from a place of stability, active range of motion. On your next inhale from the legs, lift a little bit higher. Release the hands either side of your front foot. Tuck the back toes under and step your way all the way back to a downward facing dog. Now, yogi's choice, feel free to take a little rest in child's pose, stay in downward dog, or we move through a vinyasa of your choice. We inhale forward to a high plank. We lower down via the knees, tucking the elbows in towards the rib cage until the belly touches the floor. Roll the shoulders back as you inhale into your cobra pose. Lift the chest. And on an exhale, press back via the knees to downward facing dog. And wherever you are, we'll meet back here. Let the big toes touch at the back of your yoga mat. On an inhale, lift the right leg up and back into that three-legged dog. As you exhale, draw the right knee forward into the chest. Step or shimmy the right foot to the front of your mat. Back knee comes down. Again, engage the legs towards one another. From there, find that lift up towards the ceiling. Reach your fingertips up. Now, slightly different here. So as you interlace the hands, move them one pinky finger over for the unusual interlace. Bring the palms behind your head. And again, head and hand press against each other. Elbows are wide without losing that engagement in the back body and your legs. Possibly the hips could come a little bit further forward and down. And if that's worked, maybe the chest can open a little bit more towards the ceiling into your crescent moon. On your next inhale, lift from the legs. Release the hands either side of your front foot. Back toes tuck under, and we step our way back into downward facing dog. Again, yogi's choice. Stay here, rest in downward dog or child's pose. Possibly come through a vinyasa of your choice as you inhale to high plank. Exhale to lower down halfway or all the way to the floor. Inhale takes you into the back bend of your choice. And on the exhale, finding your way back, either via the knees or one straight line to your downward facing dog. Find a few breaths here. From there, bring the big toes to touch at the back of the mat. As you inhale, lift the left leg up and back. Point the toes for three-legged dog. As you exhale, draw the left knee into the chest. Shoulders come forward on top of the wrists. Step or shimmy the left foot to the front of the mat. Make sure that your feet are separated about hip distance apart. Press into the ball of your back foot and the front big toe to inhale and sweep your arms out, around and overhead. Interlace the fingers the normal way and bring the hands behind the head. Elbows again are wide. Press into your back heel and lift the chest towards the ceiling, pressing the head into the hands and resisting with the hands, possibly drawing the hips a little bit closer towards the floor. Finding your last few moments to breathe here and possibly open the chest a little bit more. On an inhale, straighten the front leg, lift the crown of the head towards the ceiling and see if you can keep the head pressing back into the hands as you start to hinge forward from the hips. Maybe just about a quarter of the way or halfway there into pyramid pose. Folding over your front leg without rounding the spine, very active in the back body, keeping the elbows wide, pressing the head back. Resisting the temptation to round forward into gravity. And then slowly as you bend the front knee, come back into an upright position. Reach your arms forward. Now from here we'll come into what is known as carrying the sun in Qigong. So soften the elbows. And from here, imagine that you're picking up the sun from the sky. You're following it down over to the right side of your mat, turning your back heel down. You carry the sun through the water as it sets and then rises again on the other side, turning the toes to point towards the back edge of the mat and finding your high lunge again at the back. Now we'll take all of that to the front again. So again, pick the sun out of the sky, follow it all the way down into the sea. Turning your feet to face forward as you lift the sun back into the sky at the front of the mat. On the exhale, release the hands to the floor. Right hand underneath its own shoulder, left fingertips lift up into a simple twist. Expand the chest. On an exhale, circle that top hand back down. Step your front foot to the back into downward facing dog. As you inhale, come forward into your high plank, shoulders on top of the wrists, and lower down via the knees all the way onto your belly with control. From here, bring your hands one on top of the other, elbows wide. Rest the forehead on top of the hands. We'll run through a few versions of Shalabhasana locust pose. Starting with the legs, as you inhale, lift the left leg up, reach the left big toe as far back as you can, and place the foot back down. Reach your right big toe as far back as you can. Lengthen the leg as you lift, and exhale to release the foot. From here, without lifting the head, see if you can float both legs at the same time, aiming to lengthen them as far back as you can and staying for a few rounds of breath here. With each inhale, lifting a little bit higher. With each exhale, allowing yourself to soften. Gently on your next exhale, release both feet back to the ground. Bring your fingertips to the outside of your yoga mat and tent the fingertips. Spin your elbows up towards the ceiling and really plug the shoulder blades in towards the spine. Press the tops of the feet down as you inhale to lift the chest, very gently pressing into the fingertips. Exhale to come down. Inhale, press a little bit more weight into the fingers as you lift up, about halfway. And exhale to soften back towards the floor. Final time as you inhale, lift up, expand the chest, and exhale to come all the way down. Plant the hands underneath your shoulders. Exhale to press your way all the way back into a child's pose. Knees as wide as is comfortable. Tuck the toes under. As you exhale, make your way into that downward facing dog, feet hip distance when you arrive. Bring the big toes to touch as you inhale, right leg lifts up and back, three-legged dog. Exhale, draw the right knee in towards the chest, bring the shoulders forward and hover there in tiger's curl. Step or shimmy the foot to the front. Land it lightly if you can. Make sure that your feet are separated hip distance. Again here, press into front big toe and the ball of the back foot. On an inhale, sweep the arms out, around and overhead. Find your high lunge on the second side. Again, interlace the hands, but go for the unusual interlace. So one pinky finger over. Hands go behind the head. And from there, the elbows are separated wide. You press the head back and resist it with your hands. So very active shoulders, very active neck muscles. Supporting the upper spine as we start to open the chest towards the ceiling, finding the back bend of our high lunge, maybe deepening into the hips, opening the front of our left quad muscle a little bit more deeply. And then straighten the front leg, come into an upright position. Keep that engagement in the arms and the head as you start to hinge forward, crown of the head reaching for the horizon line. Possibly coming parallel to the floor if you're very, very flexible and strong. Maybe not losing your balance like your teacher. And on your next inhale, rebend the front knee, come back into that upright position and release the hands in front of you. Again, see if you can pick up the sun at the front of your mat and then allow it to drop down into the ocean and carry it through as you transition the feet to point to the back of your yoga mat. Lift the sun back into the sky. And once you've found your high lunge here at the back, transition to the front again. So let the sun drop into the ocean under the horizon line. Carry it forward and help it to lift back up. As you exhale, swim the hands down to the floor, left hand underneath its own shoulder, right fingertips lift into that simple twist on the second side. Circle the top hand all the way back and down, frame the front foot as you exhale, step your front foot to the back into a downward facing dog, feet hip distance. When you arrive, press down through index finger and thumb and spin your inner elbows forward for a few rounds of breath. On an inhale, let your shoulders travel forward on top of your wrists into a high plank. Lower down via the knees, belly to the floor with control. From here, optional to keep your feet at least hip distance, which is helpful if you are or have been dealing with lower back pain. If that's not the case, then do bring your feet together and glue the legs to one another. Walk the hands all the way down towards your hips, palms facing up towards the ceiling. On an inhale, lift the legs, lift the chest, float the shoulders back. And when you're ready, possibly lift the arms into full locust pose, Shalabhasana. The eyes are forward at the front of your mat. And with each inhale, you might be able to find just a little bit more lift and length throughout the body. And with the exhale, you soften towards the floor. Working with the breath for your last few rounds here. And possibly on your final breath here as you inhale, lifting a little bit higher if you can. On the exhale, softening everything down for a moment. Bring your hands underneath your forehead, one hand on top of the other. Let your hips roll side to side a few times to release the lower back. And slowly with the hands underneath your shoulders, press yourself all the way back to child's pose and walk the hands in so that you end up in a kneeling position at the back of your yoga mat. Now, if you know you have sensitive knees, then unravel your little blanket roll, place it in front of you and walk your knees on top. You want the knees to be hip distance. And from here, I'll talk you through a few variations of camel pose. And we'll start with the first variation that's really about strengthening the front and back body in equal measure. And really, if you have dealt with lower back pain, then this is the place you should stay in, because you really want to focus on building more muscle tissue to support your spine and hopefully reduce any sensations of pain or compression in the lower back in the long term. If you don't have any lower back issues, then I will talk you through some more advanced stages as well. So let's start in a kneeling position with the knees directly underneath the hips. And just for this first round, we'll tuck the toes under. And we'll have the hands, you can either have the hands on the hips already, or if you prefer, for a little bit of counterbalance, it can help to reach your fingertips forward in a sort of mummy position so they come straight out from your shoulders. And I tend to refer to these as camel dips. So make sure that your knees are directly underneath the hips. And from here, trust your legs. As you exhale, slowly reach the shoulders back, leaning into the legs. As you inhale, roll the thighs in towards one another and come all the way back up. So this teaches you the actions of coming into camel pose and also safely coming back out. So try it a few more times and see if you can sort of test how much you trust your legs here. So as you exhale, you might be able to come a little bit further back and slowly making your way upright again. Just a few more times, sort of playing with that action, that lever that comes all the way from your thighs and glutes and pulls you back in. And the next time that you come all the way upright, untuck your toes, sit your sitting bones all the way onto the heels, rest your hands one on top of the other in your lap, and for a moment close the eyes completely or just soften the gaze. Let the shoulders relax, let the breath come back to its normal pace, its natural rhythm. And from here, we'll move on to our second option. So as I said, if you have any lower back issues, then stay with that first variation. You could even see if you can stay a little bit longer in that lean back position. Otherwise, the hands go on top of your hips. And again, if you prefer, you can tuck the toes under here. But if you want to try this with untucked toes, then make sure that you're pressing the tops of your feet very actively into the floor. We start in the same way, so we'll lean our shoulders back as far as we can. And from there, it should be fairly easy to reach your heel. And the opposite arm lifts up into an asymmetrical camel pose. And from there, you can press the hips forwards, you can lift the chest, and see if you can not put too much weight into your bottom hand. Use your right arm to bring yourself all the way back upright. Hands come all the way back onto the hips, and we'll do that on the second side. So we'll lean into our legs, reaching the shoulders back. Seeing if we can reach the right hand towards the right heel. Left fingertips lift up and overhead into that asymmetrical camel on the second side. Possibly the hips and chest can expand forward for the last breath. And slowly that left hand is helpful in bringing us all the way back to center, and we can release again, sitting bones to the heels, bending the knees, relaxing the hands into the lap. Closing the eyes or softening the gaze. Taking a few moments to allow the breath to come back to its natural rhythm. And for this next part, before we get into it, I'll just briefly say that one of the more helpful tools in recognizing whether you've gone too deep into that back bend for your body is to actually create a little bit of a humming sound in your throat. So see if you can still breathe, whether your diaphragms are still stacked one on top of the other in a way that is accommodating to your body, or if you've gone a little bit too far. So again, we'll find that kneeling position. You can of course stick with any of the previous variations if you prefer. Toes either tucked under or untucked. From there, pressing into the tops of your feet if they are untucked. Lean your shoulders back, roll the shoulder blades in towards the spine and open the chest, press the hips forward. Either reach one hand back at a time for an asymmetrical camel, or possibly, if it's within easy reach, you could place both hands on both heels. And from there, I'm really not placing a lot of weight into my hands, but I'm still relying mostly on my legs and glutes to support me here. So I'm pressing the hips forward, lifting the chest actively towards the ceiling. And you know I can still breathe because I'm still talking you through all of this. But if you wanted to, possibly there, if you've given yourself a little hum and everything feels good in the lower back, you could release your head just gently onto your trapezius muscles. And if you're ready to come out of this, then lift your head first. Bring the hands onto the hips and again, roll the thighs in. So you're coming up in a symmetrical way. You're not twisting the spine and you're allowing the hips to come all the way back to the heels into that kneeling position. And from here, you could walk the hands forward into a more traditional child's pose. If you prefer to give yourself a deeper counter stretch, you could rest the forehead on the floor and reach your fingertips towards the back of the mat with the palms facing towards the ceiling. Staying just for a few rounds of breath, allowing the spine to adjust and lengthen. And slowly from here, come all the way back into a seated position. Slip your blanket out from underneath you, put it to one side. And we'll come all the way back onto our belly. And we'll do a little bit more work to release the spine here by working into the side body. So we'll have the right forearm, we'll reach the right fingertips all the way forward and straighten the arm. Left hand underneath your left shoulder, roll all the way onto your right hip. Now bend your knees in front of you in a sort of recovery position here. And from there, see if you can steady yourself and reach the left hand either to the right side of your head or possibly all the way to your right ear. And then release the head onto your upper arm. Now, we'll crunch 5 times here by lifting the head and feet at the same time. So as you exhale, lift the head with your top hand, lift the feet, elbow towards the toes, and inhale to release the feet and head. Exhale, squeezing in. You can press just lightly into your bottom hand, and inhale to release. 3 more times, moving with the breath as you exhale, squeezing your obliques. And inhale to soften down. Final 2 in your own time here. And from there, we'll slowly roll over to the other side. So we'll reach the left arm all the way forward, rolling onto our left hip. Right hand goes in front of you, just so you can bend the knees. And from there, possibly the right hand can reach to the side of the head or all the way to your left ear. And you rest the head down. As you exhale, again, lift the feet and head towards one another, engaging all the way through the side of the body here. And then soften down as you inhale. And exhale to lift up. Inhale to release. 3 more in your own time. See if you can pause just briefly at the top of that movement. And as you come down, roll all the way back onto your belly. Hands underneath the shoulders, press your way all the way back into your final child's pose. So big toes touch. And let the knees separate. Press from the balls of your hands a little bit of weight back into the sitting bones and ground them down towards the heels. Slowly walk the hands in, come back into a kneeling position just very briefly so that we can shimmy the feet out from underneath us. And again, helpful to have your blanket and roll it back up. Now, I actually prefer to use the blanket here to support my knees because my knees have a tendency to hyperextend, so they sort of bend the wrong way. For some people, it's more helpful to have the blanket underneath your sitting bones, but we are aiming to do a little counter pose here and fold forward. So don't worry too much about rounding the spine in this final pose. Have the feet hip distance at least, and you can possibly walk your buttocks flesh slightly out from underneath your sitting bones so that you really feel your sitting bones grounded on the floor. And we'll have the hands either sides of the legs here for a moment. You can lift up and lengthen. And as you exhale here, flex the toes towards your face and walk the fingertips forward towards the feet. They don't have to reach all the way towards your feet, of course. And if you prefer to bend your knees more, then do feel free to do that. but it can feel quite nice if you then support that sort of empty space with some extra pillows and blankets. Just really fill that space up so that you're not sort of allowing the knees to hang in midair. It can feel really great for the muscles to release. And possibly you're spinning the palms to face up, which really gives you a nice sort of drop of the shoulders softening down. And again, we want to find a few rounds of breath here, even though it's a little bit harder to breathe when our chest is sort of collapsing forward. We're still trying to find that same sensation in the breath, so that lightness and lifting of the inhale and that softness of the exhale as we melt into our forward fold and create a little bit more length in the lower back. Slowly on your next inhale, walk the fingertips towards yourself. Slip your blanket out from underneath you. Cross your shins one in front of the other. And of course, if you are really rounded here, then do support your sitting bones with that blanket underneath you. And we'll close the class with just a very simple twist. So we'll inhale and lift the arms all the way up and overhead, turning from the belly button to the left side. We release the left hand behind us. Right hand can come to the inside of the right knee or all the way across to the outside of the left knee, if that's easily accessible. And then close the eyes again if you're comfortable. Find that length in the spine as you breathe in. Find that soft opening as the rib cage rolls open to the left side on the exhale. Stay for your final few rounds of breath here. On your next inhale, float the arms back up through center and exhale to go in the opposite direction. So turn the belly button towards the right side, land the right fingertips behind you, left hand either to the inside of the left knee or all the way across to the outside of the right knee. Again, lengthen up as you breathe in, exhale to twist. And staying here for a few rounds of breath. On your next inhale, reaching the arms all the way back up through center. Exhale to take the palms down towards one another and draw them to the chest. Allow your forehead to bow towards the fingertips. Use this final moment of practice to just briefly give yourself a moment of gratitude for showing up in the first place. Remember that everything that happens after you step on your yoga mat is just a big bonus. And finally, plant your sankalpa if you wish, that good intention that guides you through the rest of your week that's ahead of you. The light in me recognizes the light in you. Namaste, yogi. So thank you so much for joining me in today's practice. I hope you enjoyed the class. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Leave me a comment and let me know how it went, especially if you got all the way to this point. And hopefully I will see you back on your mat very, very shortly. If you need to find me anywhere else in the meantime, all of that information is in the video description down below. Thank you so much, yogi, and bye.